Russia has been exploiting Ukrainian vulnerabilities, corruption, oligarchs, their fifth column for decades to be controlling our country. And that peaked during the presidency of Viktor Yanukovych in 2010-2013. And that coincided not only with the probably highest level of Russian control over Ukraine during the independence times, but also a very high level of corruption, which was literally back then everywhere, both on the level of petty corruption and highest political corruption. Since 2014, Ukraine achieved tremendous progress in fighting against corruption. Is that irreversible? Not yet, but still we have to acknowledge that there is a big way. And our starting point was very problematic. And you know, this is like a turning the course of the ship. You can't do this overnight. It requires a lot of time and effort. So what did we manage to achieve? On one hand, we built a very advanced transparency. We introduced electronic asset declaration system with all of the public officials, starting with the president, ending with the village councillors needing to declare their incomes and assets and the ones of their families, also online, public. But this is not only about disclosing this information, it is also about the liability for non-disclosure and for false statements in declarations, and the liability for this as the crimes, which was the incentive for public officials to declare the truth. Also, we built from scratch the system for accountability for high-profile corruption, like the institutions, National Anti-Corruption Bureau, Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, a High Anti-Corruption Court. They were all built from scratch with the help of independent foreign experts, with the open selection procedures, with the trainings for all of those people, and with the decent salaries, which is also an important anti-corruption tool to make sure that they are not prone to getting any kind of bribes. And right now we are seeing that in the more than a year of the genocidal war, all those institutions, I mean, in accountability, because transparency was rolled back because of the martial law. So all those institutions, they are still working. The staff of all those institutions, they started to cooperate with the Ukrainian military, with the Ukrainian special forces. And we know that NABU detectives, using their skills, which they achieved while working on the anti-corruption cases, they were helping to define Russian generals and passing this information on to the Ukrainian military to defend Ukraine. So they were using their skills, you know, not only for the fight against corruption, but also for an actual everyday defense on the battlefield. But right now, all those institutions, they continue working. And that's, you know, one of the reasons, and one of the, not the reasons, that's one of the arguments why Ukrainian reforms since 2014 were successful, despite the fact that the tangible results were not seen by Ukrainian society immediately. What is incredibly important? Judicial reform. In case of Ukraine, if you introduce independence without firing corrupt crooks, you actually only empower them with much more impunity and much more corruption. So right now we made a few steps back and try to change judicial governance bodies, the highest authorities that are making decisions on hiring, firing, administrative, disciplinary procedures against judges. And after that, we will entrust them with cleansing the lower level courts of the first instance and the courts of appeals. The issue of oligarchs cannot be resolved with one law. it requires the changing of the entire ecosystem. This is, for example, anti-monopoly reform. This reform was never done in Ukraine after 2014, but it's super important, and it requires basically the relaunch of the anti-monopoly reform using the same approaches as we had for the anti-corruption institutions, because this is the agency which has to oversee market relations and to break monopolies, because that's the key source of income oligarchs are using. But not only anti-monopoly reform, this is also media reform. This is also further strengthening party financing reform, judicial, continuing anti-corruption reforms. And with all those pillars would be in place, we would make sure that not only existing oligarchs do not return their influence, but that new oligarchs are not appearing, because we are seeing that there will be a huge market of Ukrainian reconstruction ahead of us. And we need to put all the necessary safeguards to make sure that it is clean, transparent, and zero corruption from the very beginning. Because if you asked any potential investors or companies, big businesses, what were the key obstacles for doing business in Ukraine, they named lack of corruption in judiciary and corruption in general.